Hey, good day everyone, everywhere, and special greetings to all those seated in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. The name of this broadcast is Cross the Border, and I'm Nicholas, and today is our Prophecy Reality Edition. Thank the few people for showing up in the chat room. We got, hey Virginia, Michael, I think I know that guy. Good to see you, Michael. Miss you around here, see. In our first segment, I'm going to look at a few news items. You know, I kind of missed the the 12 people debate there, but I heard that it was mostly about impeachment. However, I did hear this morning that, what's her name, Nancy Pelosi, decided that they're going to drop it. That's right, they're going to drop it. And it was only an inquiry anyway. There's no provision for an impeachment inquiry. I think they're going to drop the impeachment because they can't get any traction. Plus, you can't only impeach it with the Democratic side of the Congress or whatever they are, those people up there. So I think they're going to drop that. But there was a lot of talk about the impeachment. That's all I heard about the so-called Democratic debate last night. Anybody got anything to say about that? Okay, no comments. Pray for our leaders. Not simply condemnation. And you know that I do that. I think I said that last time I talked about Trump. We should pray for Trump. And we should pray for him to stay in there while we're praying for him. Because these Democrats, frankly, if one of them gets in there, it's kind of scary when you think about where it may lead. But, hey, if we could endure 8 years of Obama, did we endure it? Well, things did get quite a bit worse in the 8 years of Obama. Spread homosexuality throughout the world, funded more abortions, and raised up Islam in the U.S. while banning Christianity as much as possible. So, yeah, a lot of damage was done, but it seems that all of the presidents that have been presidents in my lifetime have done mostly damage to the country. I think that's all they do is damage. Well, I'm not going to blame it on the president, because it seems to me that Donald Trump is trying really hard, but he has to fight against those in his own cabinet, those in the government. Those people in the government that are always there, regardless of who gets voted in and out. Those people you have to fight against, plus fight against the other party that's trying to, punish you for winning the election, apparently. I've never seen so much hatred for a president in my life as this one. I mean, I did not like George Bush. I would have rather had Bill Clinton in there than George Bush, to tell you the truth. But the fact is this, the shadow government is doing what it wants. It can make a president impotent. I'm afraid that they're going to probably, or at least attempt, if they just can't make him impotent, like pulling out of Syria. And I don't think that the Antichrist was too happy with that for some reason. And a lot of things that he's doing, I don't think the Antichrist is too happy with. I don't think that Donald Trump loves the Antichrist as much as Obama and the Bushes did, and all of the rest before him. But it doesn't matter. It all doesn't matter all that much, because Christ is coming back soon, and the things that are written in the Scripture are going to come to pass. It's just a lot of the details that we don't have that we're going to live to fill in as we watch them happen. Smoke says, I did not watch, no comment. It would not be politically correct. Yeah, and it's just watching these Democrats, and it's just beyond the pale. Yes, that's right. Bush and Clinton were good friends with the same daddy. I mean, that's the Pope. At least that's what I think smoke in the chat room means, the same daddy. I've been preparing for to do these history segments here, so it's been taking a lot of my time, as well as writing my next book. It's going to be 2 parts. The first part is going to be a defense of historicism, and the second part is going to be a Kiliist apology, if you know what that is now. Kiliism was thought to be heretical before the Reformation and up through Augustine, who pretty much cemented the whole idea that of amillennialism. You get it now. Kiliist, of course, the word Kiliist has its root in the word the millennium, and it was thought to be a heresy. So I'm doing a Kiliist apology for the Reformed Church and historicist thought. And when you think about the amillennial historicist, it's kind of an oxymoron, because to be a Protestant historicist and to throw out the millennial reign of Christ just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. And it didn't make any sense to E.B. Elliott either. And that's why you see the amillennials walking away from the protest and forgetting the whole idea that the Antichrist, or that the papacy is the seat of the Antichrist, and of course the Roman Catholic Church, that's Roman Catholic Church, is that great apostasy that was outed by Paul at 2 Thessalonians. But to be a historicist and an amillennialist doesn't make sense, because it requires a different mode of interpreting the prophecy. Because all of the Reformed Fathers, just because they did not do any write a commentary on the Apocalypse, the early Reformers, Luther, and all of those, let's see, who else? Who else could we talk about? Calvin, Wycliffe, all of the early Reformers. They really didn't have time to dive into Bible prophecy. And I know, because I know how much effort it takes to do a really scholastic review and research into prophecy. It takes a lot of work. I mean, you look at what E.B. Elliott did, the most exhaustive work that's ever been done on the book of Revelation. I think there was one other I was looking at, and it was by a Scottish pastor in the 1500s, but really it was connecting a lot of things up through the 15th century, but after that it was all kind of a nonsensical for the future, and there were no new ideas in it really, because he just fell back to the amillennialism of Augustine. And that's really where the Reformed Church has rested in eschatology, is the amillennialism of Augustine. And if they really put their study into the apocalyptic speech of the Reformed Fathers, of course, just because they did not write a commentary on the apocalypse does not mean that they didn't say anything that was apocalyptic in nature, because every time they named the Roman Catholic Church as the great apostasy and the papacy as the seat of the Antichrist, they were speaking apocalyptically. So if you carry that out to its to the end, or where it leads, that would be in premillennial historicism. Then it all makes sense. It also makes sense when you think about that. Why? Because they've clung to the amillennialism of 4th century Augustine, pre-Reformation Augustine, and walked away from the apocalyptic mentions on the Antichrist and the Great Apostasy, which, and even, well, they want to cling to the 1260 years, but then what comes after that? Where does that lead? Suddenly we go off into, from a historicist interpretation of the Bible, and then at the French Revolution we drop it, and then we say after that it's all allegorical, or it's all spiritually, or what's the word I'm looking for? I hate that when I lose a word. But you get the idea. It's not literal, it's figurative. Chapter 20 of the Revelation is entirely figurative to fit the 4th century amillennialism of Augustine. And Augustine, of course, writing and setting the mode of the century, and to be carried on, of course, because he lived during a time when Christianity was now accepted by the state, and Christians were prospering, and they considered that to be the beginning of the millennium, or figurative millennium. Thus, amillennialism was now correct, and premillennialism, or a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ, or Kiliist, was now a heresy. It was the Kiliist heresy. And of course the Catholic Church still holds that today. They call it the millenarian heresy. Let me check the chat room, see if we got any comments or questions. I got a few minutes left in this segment. And Corporate says the history segments are great. Yeah, well, I wish they could get more listeners or support, because like I said, I'm thinking how am I going to support myself? But I guess it's just getting more and more difficult all the time. I'm thinking about I've had my difficulties with being excluded more and more all the time from things. And Michael knows what I'm talking about in the chat room. I guess he's out already, probably on his way to labor somewhere for substandard wages for not having a Social Security number. I know what that's all about, and I know that Michael is doing that. Oh, he's still in the chat room there. Oh, he quit. Okay, but he's back. He's in the chat room and he quit. It's a timeout, quit. So I guess he's still here. But I'm thinking, I have Polish ancestry. I have grandparents who were born in Poland, so I might be able to get a Polish passport. You've seen my troubles of getting a passport. I haven't got one yet. I really don't want to fight the federal government. I'm not sure it would do me any good. I think it might have other unintended consequences. But I might be able to get a Polish passport. So, hey, yeah, that's right. My grandparents on my mother's side were Polish. So you can start with the Polish jokes now if you want. Yeah. But that's all I'm going to say about that. Like I said, next segment, we're going to jump back into the Crusades against the Albigenses. And what a sad, terrible tale it is. I mean, if you could read this and not realize who the Antichrist is, then, yeah, most people don't want to hear the truth. So I have to rely on the few supporters I have, and rely on the Lord through the few supporters I've had, and perhaps it would be nice to live a little more comfortably and to be able to reach more people. But structure segments with announcing the title. Listeners will then know what to look forward to. Oh, yeah. Well, I did that. Of course, my mic was dead probably when I did it. But yeah, next segment. The title is Crusades Against the Albigenses. Anyway, so we're going to do that. No comments, no questions, no phone calls from the chat room. I think I'm being shadow banned. I think there's the word out is, because if you go to YouTube, you can't find out that First Amendment Radio has been running continuously live on YouTube since September 19th. That's right. I just shut it off before this program, though, because I'm live here. But I ran it through the last two programs I did live continuously. But you would never know it, would you? Okay, well, we're going to come back and jump into our Christian history, Crusades Against the Albigenses. I want to thank you all for showing up today, and stick around for these following segments.
Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust, I will not be afraid. Behold, God is my strength.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Gold and silver is tremendously undervalued. Global demand vastly exceeds mine supply by more than 60% annually. There is little in the financial world more certain than a coming explosion in the prices of gold and silver. The U.S. dollar continues to lose value and respect as the world's reserve currency. Our nation faces challenges on many fronts, and a day doesn't pass without another economist bringing forth warnings of impending economic calamity. There has never been a better time than right now to acquire physical gold and silver. Discount Gold and Silver Trading was founded on the principles of truth and honesty. We believe in providing a quality product, quality service, and most importantly, competitive pricing. We provide all forms of precious metals, including American gold, silver, platinum, and rare investment and circulated coins. Silver bars, rounds, and 90% silver bags are on hand for the silver investor. Gold self-directed IRAs are available. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, that's 1-800-375-4188. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back. You're listening to Across the Border. This is our Prophecy Reality Edition. And in this segment, we're going to jump back into our Christian history series here. And we're talking about the Crusades against the Albigenses. A very interesting tale. Let's jump into this. The torch of persecution was fairly kindled in the beginning of the 13th century. Those baleful fires, which had smoldered since the fall of the empire, were now reignited. But it must be noted that this was the act not of the state, but of the church. Rome had founded her dominion upon the dogma of persecution. She sustained herself Lord of the conscience. Out of this prolific but pestiferous root came a whole century of fulminating edicts, to be followed by centuries of blazing piles. The maxim placed at the foundation of her system would inspire and mold the whole policy of the Church of Rome, divine mistress of the conscience and of the faith. She claimed the exclusive right to prescribe to every human being what he was to believe, and to pursue with temporal and spiritual terrors every form of worship different from her own, till she had chased it out of the world. The first exemplification on a great scale of her office which she gave mankind was the Crusades. As the professors of an impure creed, she pronounced sentence of extermination on the Saracens of the Holy Land. She sent thither some millions of crusaders to execute her ban. And the lands, cities, and wealth of the slaughtered infidels she bestowed upon her unorthodox sons, or I should say, her orthodox sons. If it was right to apply this principle to one pagan country, we do not see what should hinder Rome, unless indeed lack of power, from sending her missionaries to every land where infidelity and heresy prevailed, emptying them of their evil creed and their evil inhabitants together, and repeopling them anew with a pure race from within her own orthodox pale. But now the fervor of the Crusades had begun sensibly to abate. The result had not responded either to the expectations of the Church that had planned them, or to the masses that had carried them out. The golden crowns of paradise had all been duly bestowed, doubtless, but of course, on those of the Crusaders only who had fallen. The survivors, as yet, inherited little save wounds, poverty, and disease. The Church, too, began to see that the zeal and blood, which were being so freely expended on the shores of Asia, might be better turned to account nearer home. The Albigenses and other sects springing up at her door were more dangerous foes of the papacy than the Saracens of the distant East. For a while, the Pope saw with comparative indifference the growth of these religious communities. They dreaded no harm from bodies apparently so insignificant, and even entertained at times the ideas of grafting them into her own system as separate orders, or as resuscitating and purifying forces. With the advent of Innocent III, however, came a new policy. He perceived that the principles of these communities were wholly alien in their nature to those of the papacy. that they never could be made to work in concert with it, and that if left to develop themselves, they would most surely effect its overthrow. Accordingly, the cloud of exterminating vengeance which rolled in the skies of the world whithersoever he was pleased to command was ordered to halt, to return westward, and discharge its chastisement on the south of Europe. Let us take a glance at the region which this dreadful tempest is about to smite. The France of those days, instead of forming an entire monarchy, was parted into 4 grand divisions. It is the most southerly of the 4, the Narbonne Gaul, to which our attention is now to be turned. This was an ample and goodly territory, stretching from the Dauphine Alps on the east to the Pyrenees on the southwest, and comprising the modern provinces of Dauphine, Provence, Languedoc, or Gascony. It was watered throughout by the Rhone, which descended upon it from the north, and it was washed along its southern boundary by the Mediterranean. Occupied by an intelligent population, it had become under their skillful husbandry one vast expanse of cornfield and vineyard, of fruit tree and forest. To the riches of the soil were added the wealth of commerce, in which the inhabitants were tempted to engage by the proximity of the sea and the neighborhood of the Italian republics. Above all, its people were addicted to the pursuits of art and poetry. It was the land of the troubadour. It was further embellished by numerous castles of a powerful nobility, who spent their time in elegant festivities and gay tournaments. But better things than poetry and feats of mimic war flourished here. The towns, formed into communes and placed under municipal institutions, enjoyed no small measure of freedom. The lively and poetic genius of the people had enabled them to form a language of their own, namely, the Provençal. In richness of vocal, softness of cadence, and illustration of idiom, the Provençal exceeded all the languages of Europe, and promised to become the universal tongue of Christendom. Best of all, a pure Christianity was developing in the region. It was here, on the banks of the Rhone, that Irenaeus and the other early apostles of Gaul had labored, and the seeds which their hands had deposited in its soil, watered by the blood of martyrs who had fought in the first ranks in the terrible combat of those days, had never wholly perished. Influences of recent birth had helped to quicken the seed into a second growth. Foremost among these was a translation of the New Testament into the Provençal, the earliest, as we have shown, of all our modern versions of the Scriptures. The barons protected the people in their evangelical sentiments, some because they shared their opinions, others because they found them to be industrious and skillful cultivators of their lands. A cordial welcome awaited the troubadour at their castle gates. He departed loaded with gifts, and he enjoyed the baron's protection as he passed on through the cities and villages, concealing, not infrequently, the colporteur and missionary under the guise of the songster. The hour of a great revolt against Rome appeared to be near. Surrounded by the fostering influences of art, intelligence, and liberty, primitive Christianity was here powerfully developing itself. It seemed, verily, that the 13th and not the 16th century would be the date of the Reformation, and that its cradle would be placed not in Germany, but in the south of France. The penetrating and far-seeing eye of Innocent III saw all this very clearly. Not at the foot of the Alps and the Pyrenees only did he detect a new life. In other countries of Europe, in Italy, in Spain, Flanders, and Hungary, wherever, in short, dispersion had driven the sectaries, he discovered the same fermentation below the surface, the same incipient revolt against the papal power. He resolved, without loss of time, to grapple with and crush the movement. He issued an edict enjoining the extermination of all heretics. Cities would be drowned in blood, kingdoms would be laid waste, art and civilization would perish, and the progress of the world would be rolled back for centuries. But not otherwise could the movement be arrested and Rome saved. A long series of persecuting edicts and canons paved the way for these horrible butcheries. The Council of Toulouse in 1119, presided over by Pope Calixtus II, announced a general excommunication upon all who held the sentiments of the Albigenses, cast them out of the church, delivered them to the sword of the state to be punished, and excluded in the same condemnation all who should afford them defense or protection. This canon was renewed in the Second General Council of Lateran, 1139, under Innocent II. Each succeeding council strove to excel its predecessor in its sanguinary and pitiless spirit. The Council of Tours, 1163, under Alexander III, stripped the heretics of their goods, forbade under peril of excommunication any to relieve them, and left them to perish without aid. The Third General Council of Lateran, 1179, under Alexander III, enjoined princes to make war upon them, to take their possessions for a spoil, to reduce their persons to slavery, and to withhold from them Christian burial. The Fourth General Council of Lateran bears the stern and comprehensive stamp of the man under whom it was held. The council commanded princes to take an oath to extirpate heretics from their dominions. Fearing that some, from motives of self-interest, might hesitate to destroy the more industrious of their subjects, the council sought to quicken their obedience by appealing to their avarice. It made over the heritages of the excommunicated to those who should carry out the sentence pronounced upon them. Still further to stimulate this pious work, the council rewarded a service of 40 days in it with the same ample indulgences which had aforetime been bestowed on those who served in the distant and dangerous Crusades. And that is the Crusades of Syria. If any prince should still hold back, he himself was, after a year's grace, to be smitten with excommunication. His vassals were to be loosed from their allegiance, and his lands given to whoever had the will or the power to seize them, after having first purged them of heresy. That this work of extirpation might be thoroughly done, the bishops were empowered to make an annual visitation of their dioceses, to institute a very close search for heretics, and to extract an oath from the leading inhabitants that they would report to the ecclesiastics from time to time those among their neighbors and acquaintances who had strayed from the faith. It is hardly necessary to say that it is Innocent III who speaks in this council. It was assembled in his palace of the Lateran in 1215. It was one of the most brilliant councils ever convened, being composed of 800 abbots and priors, 400 bishops, besides patriarchs, deputies, and ambassadors from all nations. It was opened by Innocent in person, with a discourse from the words, "With desire I have desired to eat this Passover with you," he said. We cannot pursue farther this series of terrific edicts, which runs on till the end of the century and into the next. Each is like that which went before it, save only that it surpasses it in cruelty and terror. The fearful pillaging and massacres which instantly followed in the south of France, and which were reenacted in following centuries in all the countries of Christendom, but were but two faithful transcripts, both in spirit and letter, of these ecclesiastical enactments. Meanwhile, we must note that it is out of the chair of the Pope, out of the dogma, that the Church is mistress of the conscience, that this river of blood is seen to flow. 3 years was this storm in gathering. Its first heralds were the monks of Citeaux, sent abroad by Innocent III in 1206 to preach the crusade throughout France and the adjoining kingdoms. There followed Saint Dominic and his band, who traveled on foot, 2 and 2, with full powers from the Pope to search out heretics, dispute with them, and to set a mark on those who were to be burned when opportunity should offer. In this mission of inquisition, we see the first beginnings of a tribunal, which came afterwards to bear the terrible name of the Inquisition. These gave themselves to the work with an ardor which had not been equaled since the times of Peter the Hermit. The fiery orators of the Vatican but too easily succeeded in kindling the fanaticism of the masses. War was at all times the delight of the peoples among whom this mission was discharged. But to engage in this war, what dazzling temptations were held out! The foes they were to march against were accursed of God and the Church. To shed their blood was to wash away their own sins. It was to atone for all the vices and crimes of a lifetime. And then to think of the dwellings of the Albigenses, replenished with elegances and stored with wealth, and of the fields blooming with the richest cultivation, all to become the lawful spoil of the crossed invader. But this was only a first installment of the great and brilliant recompense in the future. They had the word of the Pope that at the moment of death, they should find the angels prepared to carry them aloft to the gates of paradise open for their entrance, and the crowns and delights of the upper world waiting for their choice. The crusader of the previous century had to buy forgiveness with a great sum. He had to cross the sea to face the Saracen, to linger out years amid unknown toils and perils, and to return, if he should ever return, with broken health and ruined fortune. But now a campaign of 40 days in one's own country, involving no hardship and very little risk, was all that was demanded for one's eternal salvation. Never before had paradise been sold so cheap. The preparations for this war of extermination went on throughout the years 1207 and 1208, like the mutterings of the distant thunder or the hoarse roar of ocean when the tempest is rising. The dreadful sounds filled Europe, and their echoes reached the doomed provinces, where they were heard with terror. In the spring of 1209, these armed fanatics were ready to march. One body had assembled at Lyon, led by Arnold, abbot of Citeaux, the legate of the Pope. It descended by the valley of the Rhone. A second army gathered in Agnon under the Bishop of Bordeaux. A third horde of militant pilgrims marshaled in the north, the subjects of Philip Augustus, and at their head marched the Bishop of Pai. The closest neighbors of the Albigenses rose in a body and swelled this already overgrown host. The chief director of this sacred war was the papal legate, the abbot of Citeaux. Its chief military commander was Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester, a French nobleman who had practiced war and learned cruelty in the Crusades of the Holy Land. In putting himself at the head of these crossed and fanatical hordes, He was influenced, it is believed, quite as much by a covetous greed of the ample and rich territories of Raymond, Count of Toulouse, as by a hatred of the heresy that Raymond was suspected of protecting. The number of crusaders who now put themselves in motion is variously estimated from 50,000 to 500,000. The former is the reckoning of the abbot of Vaux, Cernay, the popish chronicler of the war. But his calculation, says Sismondi, does not include the ignorant and fanatical multitude which followed each preacher, armed with scythes and clubs, and promised to themselves that if they were not in a condition to combat the knights of Languedoc, they might at least be able to murder the women and children of the heretics. This overwhelming host precipitated itself upon the estates of Raymond VI, Count of Toulouse. Seeing the storm approach, he was seized with dread, wrote submissive letters to Rome, and offered to accept whatever terms the papal legate might please to dictate. As the price of his reconciliation, he had to deliver up to the Pope 7 of his strongest towns, to appear at the door of the church where the dead body of the legate Castelnau, who had been murdered in his dominions, lay, and to be there beaten with rods. Next, a rope was put about his neck, and he was dragged by the legate to the tomb of the friar, in the presence of several bishops and an immense multitude of spectators. After all this, he was obliged to take the cross and join with those who were seizing and plundering his cities, massacring his subjects, and carrying fire and sword throughout his territories. Stung by these humiliations and calamities, he again changed sides. But his resolution to brave the papal wrath came too late. He was again smitten with interdict. His possessions were given to Simon de Montfort, and in the end he saw himself reft of all. Among the princes of the region, now visited with this devastating scourge, the next in rank and influence to the Count of Toulouse was the young Raymond Roger, Viscount of Béziers. Every day this horde of murderers drew nearer and nearer his territories. Submission would only invite destruction. He hastened to put his kingdom into a posture of defense. His vassals were murderous and valiant. His vassals were numerous and valiant. Their fortified castles covered the face of the country. Of his towns, too, Béziers and Carcassonne were of great size and strength, and he judged that in these circumstances it was not too rash to hope to turn the brunt of the impending tempest. He called round him his armed knights, and told them that his purpose was to fight. Many of them were papists, as he himself was. But he pointed to the character of the hordes that were approaching, who made it their sole business to drown the earth with blood, without much distinction whether it was Catholic or Albigensian blood that they had spilled. His knights applauded the resolution of their young and brave liege lord. The castles were garrisoned and provisioned. The peasantry of the surrounding districts gathered into them, and the cities were provided against the siege. Placing in Béziers a number of valiant knights, and telling the inhabitants that their only hope of safety lay in making a stout defense, Raymond shut himself up in Carcassonne and waited the approach of the army of crusaders. Onward came the host, before them a smiling country, in their rear a piteous picture of devastation. Battered castles, the blackened walls and towers of silent cities, homesteads in ashes, and a desert scathed with fire and stained with blood. In the middle of July 1209, 3 bodies of crusaders arrived and sat down under the walk of Béziers. And we're going to go into a break here. You're listening Across the Border, our Prophecy Reality Edition, and we're going to continue with our Christian history. of the Albigensian Crusades when we return from these messages. Don't go anywhere.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
Back. You're listening to Across the Border, our Prophecy Reality Edition. Let's see, had some questions in the chat room about what I'm reading from. This is Christian History, and this is from The History of Protestantism by James A. Wiley. And this is The Crusades Against the Albigenses is the chapter that we've been reading from. And we're going to pick up where we left off in right where we left off. And for those of you watching on live video, the text is actually on the screen. So you can follow along if you want. Or, like I said, well, it'd be kind of hard to follow along because I'm using a PDF that you probably can't get a hold of. A PDF of text. All right, let's continue then. Where we left off. I'm in the middle of a paragraph here, so we're going to back up a little bit to the beginning of that paragraph. Well, that's a long paragraph. Among the region, now visited with this devastating scourge, the next in rank and influence to the Count of Toulouse was the young Raymond Roger, Viscount of Béziers. Every day this horde of murderers drew nearer and nearer to his territories. Submission would only invite destruction. He hastened to put his kingdom into a posture of defense. His vassals were numerous and valiant. Their fortified castles covered the face of the country. Of his town, too, Béziers and Carcassonne were of great size and strength, and he judged that in these circumstances it was not too rash to hope to turn the brunt of the impending tempest. He called round him his armed knights, and told them that his purpose was to fight. Many of them were papists, as he himself was. But he pointed to the character of the hordes that were approaching, who made it their sole business to drown the earth in blood, without much distinction whether it was Catholic or Albigensian blood that they spilled. His knights applauded the resolution of their young and brave liege lord. The castles were garrisoned and provisioned. The peasantry of the surrounding districts gathered into them, and the cities were provided against the siege, placing in Béziers a number of valiant knights and telling the inhabitants that their only hope of safety lay in making a stout defense. Raymond shut himself up in Carcassonne and waited the approach of the army of Crusaders. Onward came the hosts, before them a smiling country, in their rear a piteous picture of devastation, battered castles, the blackened walls and towers of silent cities, homesteads in ashes, and a desert scathed with fire and stained with blood. In the middle of July 1209, 3 bodies of Crusaders arrived, and they sat down under the walk of Béziers. The stoutest heart among the citizens quailed as they surveyed from the ramparts this host that seemed to cover the face of the earth. So great was the assemblage, says the old chronicle, both of tents and pavilions, that it appeared as if all the world was collected there. Astonished but not daunted, the men of Béziers made a rush upon the pilgrims before they should have time to fortify their encampment. It was all in vain. The assault was repelled, the Crusaders, mingling with the citizens as they hurried back to the town in broken crowds, entered the gates along with them. And Béziers was in their hands before they even formed the plan of attack. The knights inquired of the papal legate, the abbot of Citeaux, how they might distinguish the Catholics from the heretics. Arnold at once cut the knot, which time did not suffice to loose, by the following reply, which has since become famous: "Kill all, kill all. The Lord will know his own." The bloody work now began. The ordinary population of Béziers was some 15,000. At this moment, it could not be less than 4 times its usual number. For being the capital of the province, and a place of great strength, the inhabitants of the country and the open villages had been collected into it. The multitude, when they saw that the city was taken, fled to the churches, and began to toll the bells by way of supplication. This only the sooner drew upon themselves the sword of the assassins. The wretched citizens were slaughtered in a trice. Their dead bodies covered the floor of the church. They were piled in heaps round the altar. Their blood flowed in torrents at the door. 7,000 dead bodies, says Sismondi, were counted in the Magdalen alone. When the Crusaders had massacred the last living creature in Béziers, and had pillaged the houses of all that they thought worth of carrying off, they set fire to the city in every part at once, and reduced it to a vast funeral pyre. Not a house remained standing, not one human being alive. Historians differ as to the number of victims. The abbot of Citeaux, feeling somewhat shame for the butchery which he had ordered, in his letter to Innocent III reduces it to 15,000. Others make it amount to 60,000. The terrible fate which had overtaken Béziers in one day, converted into a mound of ruins, dreary and silent as any on the plain of Chaldea, told the other towns and villages the destiny that awaited them. The inhabitants, terror-stricken, fled to the woods and caves. Even the strong castles were left tenantless, their defenders deeming it vain to think of opposing so furious and overwhelming a host, pillaging, burning, and massacring as they had a mind. The Crusaders advanced to Carcassonne, where they arrived on the 1st of August. The city stood on the right bank of the Aude. Its fortifications were strong, its garrison numerous and brave, and the young Count, Raymond Roger, was at their head. The assailants advanced to the walls, but met a stout resistance. The defenders poured upon them streams of boiling water and oil, and crushed them with great stones and projectiles. The attack was again and again renewed, but was as often repulsed. Meanwhile, the 40 days' service was drawing to an end, and bands of Crusaders, having fulfilled their term and earned heaven, were departing to their homes. The papal legate, seeing the host melting away, judged it perfectly right to call Wiles to the aid of his arms. Holding out to Raymond Roger the hope of an honorable capitulation, and swearing to respect his liberty, Arnold induced the Viscount with 300 of his knights to present himself at his tent. The latter, says Sismondi, profoundly penetrated with the maxim of Innocent III, that to keep faith with those that have it not is an offense to the faith, caused the young Viscount to be arrested, with all the knights who had followed him. When the garrison saw that their leader had been imprisoned, they resolved, along with the inhabitants, to make their escape overnight by a secret passage known only to themselves, a cavern 3 leagues in length, extending from Carcassonne to the towers of the Cabardes. The Crusaders were astonished on the morrow, when not a man could be seen upon the walls, and still more Mortified was the papal legate to find that his prey had escaped him, for his purpose was to make a bonfire of the city with every man, woman, and child within it. But if this greater revenge was now out of his reach, he did not disdain a smaller one still in his power. He collected a body of some 450 persons, partly fugitives from Carcassonne whom he had captured, and partly the 300 knights who had accompanied the Viscount, and of these he burned 400 alive, and the remaining 50 he hanged. The main object of the Crusades were now accomplished. The principalities of Raymond VI, Count of Toulouse, and Raymond Roger, Viscount of Béziers, had been purged and made over to that faithful son of the Church, Simon de Montfort. The lands of the Count of Foix were likewise overrun, and joined with the neighboring provinces in the common desolation. The Viscount of Narbonne contrived to avoid a visit of the Crusades, but at the price of becoming himself the Grand Inquisitor of his own dominions, and purging them with laws even more rigorous than the Church demanded. The 20 years that followed were devoted to the cruel work of rooting out any seeds of heresy that might possibly yet remain in the soil. Every year a crowd of monks issued from the convents of Citeaux, and, taking possession of the pulpits, preached a new crusade. For the same easy service they offered the same prodigious rewards, paradise, and the consequence was that every year a new wave of fanatics gathered and rolled toward the devoted provinces. The villages and the woods were searched, and some gleanings left from the harvest of previous years were found and made food for the gibbets and stakes that in such dismal array covered the face of the country. The first instigators of these terrible proceedings, Innocent III, Simon de Montfort, the abbot of Citeaux, soon passed from the scene. But the tragedies they had begun went on. In the lands which the Albigenses, now all but extinct, had once peopled, and which they had so greatly enriched by their industry and adorned by their art, blood did not cease to flow, nor the flames to devour the victims. It would be remote from the object of our history to enter here into details, but we must dwell a little on the events of 1229. This year a council was held at Toulouse, under the papal legate, the Cardinal of St. Angelo. The foundation of the Inquisition had already been laid. Innocent III and the Roman Saint Dominic share between them the merit of this good work. In the year of the Fourth Lateran, 1215, Dominic received the pontiff's commission to judge and deliver to punishment apostate and relapsed and obstinate heretics. This was the Inquisition, though lacking as yet its full organization and equipment. That Dominic died before it was completed alters not the question touching his connection with its authorship, though of late a vindication of him has been attempted on this ground only by shifting the guilt to his church. The fact remains that Dominic accompanied the armies of Simon de Montfort, so that he delivered the Albigenses to the secular judge to be put to death. In short, worked the Inquisition so far as it had received shape and form in his day. But the Council of Toulouse still further perfected the organization and developed the working of this terrible tribunal. It erected in every city a council of inquisitors consisting of one priest and 3 laymen, whose business it was to search for heretics in towns, houses, cellars, and other lurking places, as also in caves, woods, and fields, and to denounce them to the bishops, lords, or their bailiffs. Once discovered, a summary but dreadful ordeal conducted them to the stake. The houses of the heretics were to be razed to their foundations, and the ground on which they stood condemned and confiscated, for heresy, like leprosy, polluted the very stones, and timber and soil. Lords were held responsible for the orthodoxy of their estates, and so far also for those of their neighbors. If remiss in their search, the sharp admonition of the Church soon quickened their diligence. A last will and testament was of no validity unless a priest had been by when it was made. A physician suspected was forbidden to practice. All above the age of 14 were required on oath to abjure heresy and to aid in the search for heretics. As a fitting appendage to those tyrannical acts, and a sure and lasting evidence of the real source whence that thing called heresy, on the extirpation of which they were so intent, was derived, the same council condemned the reading of the Holy Scriptures. We prohibit, says the 14th canon, the laics from having the books of the Old and New Testament, unless it be at most that any one wishes to have from devotion a psalter, a breviary for the divine offices, or the hours of the Blessed Mary. But we forbid them in the most express manner to have the above books translated into the vulgar tongue. You could only have it in Latin. And they had to be those Catholic books. Or I should say Catholic devotions. Right. In 1233, Pope Gregory IX issued a bull by which he confided the working of the Inquisition to the Dominicans. The Bishop of Tournai, his appointed legate to carry out the bull by way of completing the organization of that tribunal, which has since become the terror of Christendom and caused to perish an unconscionable number of human beings. In discharge of his commission, the bishop named 2 Dominicans in Toulouse and 2 in each city of the province to form the Tribunal of Faith. And soon, under the warm patronage of St. Louis IX of France, this court was extended to the whole of the kingdom, and instruction was at that time furnished to the inquisitors, in which the bishop enumerated the errors of the heretics. The document bears the undersigned testimony to the scriptural faith of the men whom the newly erected court was meant to root out. In the exposition made by the Bishop of Tournai of the errors of the Albigenses, says Sismondi, we find nearly all the principles upon which Luther and Calvin founded the Reformation of the 16th century. Although the Crusades, as hitherto waged, were now ended, they continued under the more dreadful form of the Inquisition. We say more dreadful form, for not so terrible was the Crusader's sword as the Inquisitor's rack, and to die from fighting in the open field or on the ramparts of a beleaguered city was a fate less horrible than to expire amid prolonged and excruciating tortures in the dungeons of the Holy Office. The tempests of the Crusades, however terrible, had yet their intermissions. They burst, passed away, and left a breathing space between their explosions. Not so the Inquisition. It worked on, day and night, century after century, with a regularity that was appalling. With steady march it extended its area till at last it embraced almost all the countries of Europe and kept piling up its dead year by year in ever larger and more ghastly heaps. These awful tragedies were the sole and deliberate acts of the Church of Rome. She planned them in solemn council. She enunciated them in dogma and canon. And in executing them, she claimed to act as the vicegerent of heaven, who had the power to save or destroy nations. Never can that church be in fairer circumstance than she was then for displaying her true genius and showing what she holds to be her true right. She was in the noon of her power. She was free from all coercion, whether of force or of fear. She could afford to be magnanimous and tolerant, were it even possible, yet the sword was the only argument she condescended to employ. She blew the trumpet of vengeance, summoned to arms the half of Europe, and crushed the rising forces of reason and religion under an avalanche of savage fanaticism. And this will be a good place to lay off. Okay, we're going into a break here, and we'll continue here when we return from these messages. You're listening Across the Border, our Prophecy Reality Edition, and Christian History. We'll be right back.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app. for all of your mobile devices. Streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now. Welcome back. You're listening to Across the Border. This is our Prophecy Reality Edition, and we're going through Christian history. And the Christian history that we're reviewing is where the Crusades, which were being expended about the 9th, 10th centuries against the Saracens in the East, were brought home by the Catholic Church. And yes, these were Catholic Crusades. Make no mistake about it. This was Catholic Europe. This was the Holy Roman Empire in its 1260 years, for hundreds of years at this point. Brought the Crusades home to employ them against heretics, or true infant Christianity that was rising up in Europe by people who were actually reading the Bible. Now this next paragraph, I was in the middle of a paragraph, but when I was reviewing this the other day, because I read all this before I come on the air several times, and this paragraph really stuck out. And at the moment I thought, man, I should publish this on my blog, just because this one paragraph stands out so remarkable. But I thought, well, in light of what we just reviewed, it may not have the effect, but it will have that effect now, because you've been with me as we've been reviewing this horrible history of that great apostasy and the man of sin, and what they were able to employ for their own devices in those days. Let's put that on the air here. Let's see, I think, where is that? Oh, here we go. In our own day, as you can see, the author here takes a break from the actual history, and he comments, in our own day. I think this should actually begin a new paragraph here, and maybe I'll make a note of that, because I'm republishing these volumes. Not quite ready to put them into publication yet, till I'm done editing them. But anyway, in our own day, all these horrible deeds have been reviewed, ratified, and sanctioned by the same church that now 8 centuries ago, enacted them. First, in the syllabus of 1864. Of course, the author here is writing, after 1864, and in that 19th century is when he is writing. And here we are, a century and a half later. Okay, so we would say 6, 7, 8, 9 centuries ago from where we're at, which expressly vindicates the ground on which these crusades were done. See, the papacy in 1864 reviewed what they had done in history, and they vindicate the ground on which they performed these crusades and inquisitions. And I don't really believe that anything is different today. Actually, I don't believe anything is different today. That if they were in the position to do the same things, they would do them. Oops, oh wait a minute, I'm speaking too soon. They are in the same position, and they are doing the same things today. Only now, they do it under layers to hide the fact that they are doing it. But the Antichrist, yes, that same Antichrist that was at the head of these, the man of sin, sitting in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Okay? That is, he sits in the church saying that he is in the place of God, that he is the vicegerent of Christ on earth, and he rules in the name of heaven. That church says, in our own day, all these horrible deeds have been reviewed, ratified, and sanctioned by the same church that so many centuries ago enacted them. First, in the syllabus of 1864, which expressly vindicates the ground on which these crusades were done, namely, that the Church of Rome possesses the supremacy of both powers, the spiritual and temporal. They still believe that today. No. Don't doubt it for a minute. That she has the right to employ both swords in the extirpation of heresy. That in the exercise of this right, in the past, she never exceeded by a hair's breadth her just prerogatives, and that what she has done aforetime she may do in time to come, as often as occasion shall require and opportunity may serve. See, all she needs is occasion and opportunity. That is Roman Church dogma. That is the dogma of the great apostasy and the man of sin even today. And secondly, they have been endorsed over and over again by the decree of infallibility, which declares that the popes who planned, ordered, and by their bishops and monks executed all these crimes were in these, as in all their other official acts, infallibly guided by inspiration. That is, inspiration from heaven, inspiration by God Almighty, inspiration by Jesus, through the papacy, the vicegerent of God on earth. The plea that it was the 13th century when these horrible butcheries were committed, everyone views to be wholly inadmissible. An infallible church has no need to wait for the coming light of philosophy and science. Her sun is always in the zenith. The 13th and the 19th century are the same to her, for she is just as infallible in the one as in the other. So we'll pick up here. So fell, smitten down by this terrible blow to rise no more, in the same age and among the same people, the Protestantism of the 13th century. It did not perish alone. All the regenerative forces of a social and intellectual kind which Protestantism, even at that early stage, had evoked, were rooted out along with it. Letters had begun to refine, liberty to emancipate, art to beautify, and commerce to enrich the region. All were swept away by a vengeful power that, regardless of what it destroyed, provided only that it accomplished the extirpation of Protestantism. How changed the region from what it once was! There the song of the troubadour was heard no more. No more was the gallant knight seen riding forth to display his prowess in the gay tournament. No more were the cheerful voices of the reaper and the grape gatherer heard in the fields. The rich harvests of the region were trodden into the dust. Its fruitful vines and flourishing olive trees were torn up. Hamlet and city were swept away. Ruins, blood, and ashes covered the face of this now purified land. But Rome was not able, with all her violence, to arrest the movement of the human mind, so far as it was religious. She but scattered the sparks to break out in a wider area at a future day, and so far as it was intellectual. She but forced it into another channel. Instead of Albigenses, scholasticism now arose in France, which, after flourishing for some centuries in the schools of Paris, passed into the skeptical philosophy, and that again, in our day, into atheistic communism. It will be curious if in the future the progeny should cross the path of the parent. It turned out that this enforced the halt of 3 centuries, after all, resulted only in the goal being more quickly reached. While the movement paused, instrumentalities of remarkable power, unknown to that age, were being prepared to give quicker transmission and wider diffusion to the divine principle when it next should show itself, and further, a more robust and capable stock than the Romanesque, namely the Teutonic, was silently growing up, destined to receive the heavenly graft and to shoot forth on every side larger bows to cover Christendom with their shadow and solace it with their fruit. And our next chapter we'll be jumping into is Protestants before Protestantism, or what I have labeled pre-Reformation. Okay, many others and I have labeled pre-Reformation fathers. But this is all about Protestant Christianity, is all about primitive Christianity, the Christianity of the first apostles, the Christianity of the church that Jesus said he would build, not this perverted Christianity of the great apostate church that rose up and ruled and reigned for 1260 years. And that rule and reign, the one we're reading about now, yeah, what a rule, what a reign, right? Ended about the turn of the 19th century there, 18th to 19th century, about the time of the French Revolution. Some have pinned down 2 dates for beginning and ending, and it doesn't matter which one you pick, whether it's a progression of time or an exact time. I'll leave that to the Almighty, to sort out. But to me, it is evident in history. If you read, and I put a link in the chat room a little earlier to E.B. Elliott's Horae Apocalypticae, and he's got a chapter in 1260 years there. And also, I cover that in some depth in my in the book I'm writing right now, and I have part 1, I think, done of that book, and I'm not going to publish it until I get the second part done, though. And I've already said all of these things because the book is really proceeding from these shows that I have done and some of the series I have done here, in lecture form in the defense of historicism. So you've already heard everything I have to say. It's just in the book it's going to be more refined and exact, but it will be based on and a little more research added to it. So it will be definitely worth the effort. Whether anybody will buy it, so few people have bought my other books, but that's not the reason. I'm not doing it to make money or for sales. Just to get the message out there for the few people that are interested. I don't know if there's anything out there like, First Amendment Radio. So I guess I have to keep doing this because what else am I going to do? I can't go back to building and doing carpentry work. It crosses my mind once in a while that maybe I ought to hire myself out for a couple days a week just so I have a little more spending money here. But then what am I going to do? Do like Michael did? Ride my bicycle to projects? I have done things like that before, though. Michael, if Michael's still listening in the chat room, let me check the chat room, see if there's any questions or comments here. Therein lies the unpardonable sin called blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, Saracens meaning Muslims, yes, that's, or Islamists. I don't know, Muslim, I guess, just different names for the same thing. Comments, questions? Yeah, well, I have some minutes and I'm not going to read anymore, because I'm going to, I don't want to start something that I'll barely be able to get into the next chapter. But, as you know, that next chapter it will be the pre-Reformation, Protestants before Protestantism. And, Protestants are those that protest. And that's why I think First Amendment Radio is so important, because we really have no other protest tent, radio station or network out there anywhere that I can find. There are none. We have a lot of good Reformed, theologically Reformed people out there, but really nothing else. And nothing, and most of the people that are into historicism, they're still stuck, on 200-year-old doctrine, stuff that was written before the turn of the last century. Yeah, and like I said, I've taken those, and I put out a 6th edition, which I call the Reformation Quincentennial Edition of the Hoary Apocalyptic Age. That's the link that you have there, and that's the set that I'm selling, will be the Quincentennial Edition. So things have changed, things have happened, and I've done a lot of research. I mean, I don't want to get this wrong, right? I don't want to get it wrong. And so I want people to look at the research, look at what I've done, and challenge me if they think there's something wrong, because it's the challenges of people out there that have made me dive deeper to defend, to make an apology of the position that I've taken and refine that position or change it, because I've changed a lot of position in the last, 14 years now. I've been, probably studying prophecy perhaps more than anybody else I know, that's for sure. So it's become secondhand to me, and I'm not done yet. I'm going to keep going at it. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I'll keep working at it. Yes, the pre-Reformation fathers. Any comments, questions, or anyone want to call in and help me fill up the last few minutes of this broadcast here? Yeah. Let's see. Okay, well, I guess I'm just going to have to say something else here. What shall I say? Talking about the days we're living in, and I read about, these Crusades and Inquisitions, and I think, could it happen here? I mean, I'm surrounded by Catholics, and some of them are my neighbors, and they know I'm Protestant, and I know they're Catholic, and some of them are very devout, even have shrines in their front yards to the Queen of Heaven, the Catholic Mary, and I treat them well, and they treat me well. We're good neighbors to each other, and I think about, if we have mobs. I mean, what if it happened that we started having mobs running over from, say, south of the border? Oh, wait a minute, haven't we had mobs? We kind of putting a kibosh on that. But what if the mobs rose up in our own country? And you see these mobs, none of them are really devout, religious Catholics, that we're reading about. These are people that, that love sin. Murder and robbery is just, is secondhand to them. And, like you cross the border and you read about these other countries and the wars that are going on there for territory and money and the cabals. They have cabals over, everything now. I mean, I was watching a documentary about food and food wars they're having over some of the produce in Mexico because of all the money that's going on there. These cabals rise up and what they're willing to do. And, I think, wow, we have law and order in America. Can we keep it that way? Let's see. Smoke is saying something here, and I don't get it, Smoke. You might have to team speak in if you got something to say. Yeah, it's on. See, would we hear it though? Oh, I'd have to turn up. Yeah, I could hear team speak. I think we've done it before. But yeah, Smoke in the chat room. He does a little 1 hour broadcast on Sundays. Doesn't have a website or a blog or anything, which would be helpful if he did, that people could at least have a place to comment and contact him. You know, blogs are free, Smoke. You get one at, you could have smokeandjoe.wordpress.com. Yeah, just put that in your browser and grab it, Smoke. To give you something else to do. I don't know if you need something else to do or not, but I know I don't. I have way too much to do already. Also, I'd like to take First Amendment Radio and do like a news broadcast. I need some people that want to invest in this. You know, you have to basically invest time. Some of you may be able even to come near or to this area. And I could put you up for a while. Maybe, seeing how if that works out. If you had a motorhome or something, that would be even better, because I have places to hook up a motorhome, and until we figure out what we can do here as far as the news service. We could do First Amendment Radio News or something like that. I don't know if anyone wants to do anything like that. Breakity break, 1-9er, right? Yeah, breakity broke. I just meant to say sometimes we can only pray and know I don't need to go therein. Have enough to do now, he says. Okay, yeah. Get fighting off the beast over there in Smokeland. I mean, I don't really remember where you live, Smoke, but maybe we don't want to tell, huh? Yeah. Well, they can find me. I mean, if they want to do something to me, they probably think it's enough to shadow ban me on the internet. Because I don't know. I was growing and growing for many years, and it seemed like the growth was exponential, and then it just stopped, and now it's kind of just, even going backwards. Yeah, going backwards, right? Support for First Amendment Radio is going backwards and down. If we stay afloat, it will be by the grace of God alone. Dude says, what is Smoke's program on Sunday? Smoke says good. I don't know if that would be a biased opinion or not there, dude, but you might want to check it out for yourself. I do have a tip for you, Smoke. When you start out your broadcast, when you say your first word, you say it really loud, and then you mellow down. So try starting out a little lower and then finding your norm. Because when you start out, you go and you say whatever you say first, it's really loud, and it distorts. So start out a little lower and then find your level. And your normal level is good. It's just that initial blast just blows everything out. So anyway, I'll be listening to see if you take my advice. Okay, it looks like I finally ran out of time. And you've been listening to Cross the Border or Prophecy Reality Edition. If you can help us, that would be great. If you can move some of your regular tithe over here, $5, $10, $15, $100, $1,000 a month, that would be great. We would love it, and we really do need it. Well, may the Almighty bless and keep you.